Welcome back. Taking your phone calls. 412-575-2600 is the number on the Bordas and Bordas hotline. Also answering your tweets at Josh Taylor HD. Talking about the Penguins coming off a 4-2 win over the Coyotes tonight in Arizona. So they end a 3-game losing streak. Also talking Steelers and Patriots. That goes down tomorrow. 4:25 kickoff at Heinz Field. And this is something that's been quite, like I mentioned, discussed at quite a length during the course of the week. Just in terms of, different things that could happen. Should the Steelers use certain players in certain spots? And a discussion actually got into today earlier on 93.7 The Fan was a discussion about just necessarily who should be the focal point on offense for the Patriots. If there's one guy that they're trying to take away, who would it be? The prevailing answer was Antonio Brown, and that would be the obvious choice just because of the fact of the way he's playing in these past 8 games during this winning streak. He has been lights out, just like Ben Roethlisberger's been lights out, just like Le'Veon Bell has been lights out. These guys, all three together, have just been phenomenal. So he's the first guy you think of. Le'Veon Bell's the guy you think of as a guy that New England might try to neutralize or try to limit or try to take out of the game plan to make it a little bit more complicated. Then you have guys like Juju Smith-Schuster, who should probably be an ancillary piece, assuming that he plays, because he's listed as questionable with the hamstring injury. But it has opened the door. Having these opportunities that they've had in the past few weeks, it has opened the door for secondary or ancillary guys to step up. That game against Baltimore, we saw a lot of production from the tight end position between Jesse James and Vance McDonald, who, by the way, McDonald is listed out of this game with a shoulder injury, but we saw a lot of production from the tight end position, a lot of production from the secondary receivers, guys like Eli Rogers chipping in, guys like Martavis Bryant chipping in and making some big plays in big spots, especially being able to convert on third downs. Jesse James converted a big third down and long. So when you have those guys contributing to it, and Ben Roethlisberger talked about this during the course of the week, when you have those guys that are able to chip in and make plays over time, over the past couple weeks, the way they've been doing it, especially in that Baltimore game, it does allow you to get a little bit of a rhythm and get more comfortable. And as a quarterback, makes it a little bit more easy to make decisions knowing you can trust guys to make those plays that you're giving to them. And that's exactly what's been happening. You could make a really distinct case that some of the plays that were made in the Baltimore game were ones that might have been left on the table during the Green Bay game in that first drive where a lot of passes were dropped here and there. A lot of mistakes were made. So when you're able to correct those mistakes and make those plays in those spots, it makes for a big difference as far as guys being able to contribute. Then, of course, there's the big X factor in this game that's been discussed a lot. Rob Gronkowski, how do you account for him? There's been a lot of questions of what you do with him in coverage. And basically put, Rob Gronkowski is a 6'7" guy who weighs about 260 pounds. He's the size of a defensive lineman who is a matchup problem for defensive backs and linebackers because he's a tight end and he's pretty much uncoverable. So that becomes a bigger issue. And it kind of raises the question of whom the Steelers should use to maybe try to shadow him, or should he be bracketed, or should he be double teamed, because it does create a more difficult dynamic trying to defend a guy with that kind of size and athletic ability. Let's go to the phone lines. We will start with Barry in Johnstown. Barry, you're on the Nightly Sports Call. Hello, Barry. I guess we lost Barry, so we will try again. Let's go to Mike in Sharpsburg. Mike, you're on the Nightly Sports Call.
Good evening, Josh. How are you tonight? I hope you're well.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. You kind of stole my thunder just a minute ago when I was talking to your producer as whom do you think can shadow Rob Gronkowski and make sure that he's not a factor in the game? And I've been racking my brain, and I can't think of anybody, but you are around the Steelers a heck of a lot more than I am, so maybe you have a better insight to this. I'm going to hang up, and I want to thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful evening and happy holidays.
Well, appreciate the call and appreciate the well wishes. The way I come back to this, and every time I try to come up with a different guy, I come up with the one thing that guy can't do. There might be a guy that has enough speed that can keep up with him that's not a linebacker, but he's not big enough to be physical with him. So that takes maybe a Mike Hilton or a slot corner out of the equation. Or maybe you have a Sean Davis or a Mike Mitchell who's a little bit bigger, a little bit more physical, but they're just not as big physically. So that takes a safety out of the equation. So I'm down to the reasoning. It might come down to situation. It might come down to down the distance. It might come down to whatever personnel grouping is in the game. In which case, it might come down to maybe a T.J. Watt in the shorter yardage situation, maybe trying to take him away in a short yard situation, or maybe on the goal line using an inside linebacker to do that. But it's going to really come down to whatever situation they're in and whatever part of the field that he's lined up on. And if that's the case, you have to make sure you take away that side of the field. But when you do that, you're going to leave another side of the field open for a guy like Chris Hogan or for even a Brandon Cooks who can beat you deep. He can make plays too. So it really does become complicated. And that's where Gronk becomes a problem, because he's already a natural double team matchup problem in and of himself. And if you try to focus on that, they have other guys who can really take advantage of him. And one of them is a guy out of the backfield. And matter of fact, take your pick. It could be James White. It could be Dion Lewis. And it could be Rex Burkhead. Bill Belichick has made a career for running backs, just being able to catch passes and make plays in his system. So there's a lot of different ways. If you try to focus or fixate on Gronk, that another guy can eventually hurt you. Let's go back to the phone lines. Let's go to Marilyn and Munhall. Marilyn, you're on the Nightly Sports Call.
Hi, nice to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, too.
My question is about hockey.
Okay.
Lately, I've been noticing that they've been using the term grinders a lot. What is a grinder? What position does he play? And can you name one that plays for the Penguins? Thank you so much.
No problem. A grinder isn't necessarily a position. It's really more or less used as a term to describe a player that might not be one of those big name scoring guys. He might not be a fast winger with a great shot. He's not a Phil Kessel. That's not the definition of a grinder. It's not an Evgeny Malkin. It's not a Sidney Crosby. A grinder is more like a Carter Rowney, a guy that's going to rely on being physical, chipping in the puck, and playing deep inside the corners. Those are where your grinders are. And those are some guys that don't always get the attention and the fanfare. You probably saw a grinders kind of goal for the Penguins' first goal, the shorthanded goal between Brian Rust and Carter Rowney. That was a great play of them just making one good defensive play on a penalty kill and turning that into a goal. That's what grinders do. They're not going to have the sexy kind of plays that might make highlights, but they're the ones that coaches like, because they take a lot of courage and a lot of determination and maybe impossible situations, and they turn them into goals. Got to take a break, answer more questions when we come back. Stick around.